Today I want to talk about the moon in Pisces. Now, as is usually my process, I start by delineating the nature of Pisces and then describing how the moon comes out of Pisces. Because when you have the moon in Pisces, it is now Pisces, the sign of Pisces, that must generate the behavioral response typical of the moon. That is astrologically speaking. And that's really what it is. Now, like I said earlier in some podcasts, some signs are better suited to generating some functional lights, which you would call planets, but I call them functional lights. And to understand the difference, you'd have to come join my classes or come participate in my classes. But I do have a few podcasts where I explain why I call them functional lights. Because ultimately, astrology is dealing with psychodynamics. That's really what it is. It's dealing with the description of a reality that is being generated within your head. Okay, some descriptions or some narratives in astrology tend to forget that. So it's always good to bear that in mind, that when we're talking about the moon in Pisces, we're really talking about a very particular type of reverberation that is taking place within your head. That is pathways and trajectories that are taking place in your head, that are emphasized in your head amidst the interaction with everything else. And so what is Pisces? I do have a very good podcast on Pisces rising, wherein I explain what Pisces is in terms of the nature of what this psychological archetype is supposed to be. But in a nutshell, Pisces is a coming together of everything process. It is the tendency to bring all of reality to a singular point. Now, it is in that sense a culmination of the evolution of the ego. Now, the ego is born in Leo, right? And it comes in as a need to focus attention. That is, to bring all of attention to a single point. It's usually what we define as self-awareness, where we are able to bring this aspect of our consciousness and focus it like a lens, all right? Like the behavior of a lens with light, convex lens that is, whereby we're able to bring all of attention to a focal point, and then we use that for problem solving, basically. But the focusing that I'm talking about that happens in Pisces is not really about attention itself. It's about the nature of all reality, meaning what we consider to be an external reality and an internal reality. It is in Pisces that this boundary, the boundary between both, disappears, whereby there is no internal reality and there is no external reality. All of reality is now merged into one. And what does that simply mean? It means that one is able to tell a narrative, a story that connects both realities together very seamlessly. All right? And the difficulty with this is that, first of all, you have to understand the nature of self. And you have to understand how self experiences reality. Then you have to now understand what that reality that is being experienced is before you can perform an integration of everything. And that's why Pisceans struggle with, that's where they struggle. Because the Piscean tends to experience reality as a totally connected sense of self all the time. They struggle with boundaries because boundaries mean that there are separations between realities, between either an internal reality or an external reality, or between what constitutes one person's reality and what constitutes another person's reality. The Piscean doesn't know exactly what that is, because in their mind's eye, when they think about reality, these realities tend to blur together and blend together. All right? And that's really what it is. And the tendency now is to connect all those realities into one. And the human being is equipped to be able to do this only as an imaginative faculty. So that the Piscean is used to escaping what it considers to be mundane reality. That is the reality of separations. And to escape into a reality where it can connect everything together. And the process of connecting everything together is the process of narrative. So the Piscean is able to spin narratives that connect all existence together as best as they can. And some of these narratives appear very fantastical in terms of they don't really rhyme with reality. But if the Piscean can construct these narratives in such a way that they begin to rhyme in some way with reality, then these are your literature experts. They're your artists in that sense. They're your movie makers. They're your film directors. They're your they're the people who write the stories that become very compelling because they're able to weave narratives that connect everybody together. And that is the essence of Pisces. Pisces really is the reality system of a complex system that has become too complex to really work out the details anymore. And so the mind loses track of the complex dynamics. It can no longer tell you the relationship between cause and effect. And when this no longer happens, the mind only sees various types of effects with no way to reconcile to causes. And this is what the human mind terms as a spiritual type of reality. A reality that seems to have no rhyme or reason, a reality that seems to come out of nowhere, a reality that seems to contain things akin to magic. Because what it really describes in the Piscean realm, right, is a transformation of some kind, a transformation regarding the nature of reality. And the reason why is because the human being really is preparing to go back to that which they came from in Pisces. Because the Piscean situation is akin to the Arian situation. Aries, right? Because prior to Aries, prior to the 0 degrees of Aries, you were somewhere else in a watery environment in the womb of your mother. That watery environment is akin to the Piscean reality. Alright? Because even though you could sense things, none of the things you could sense in the womb had any meaning to you. You had no idea what these things were. You couldn't understand what anything really was. They were just things. And what was missing is the nature of connection. Because connection is what allows us to understand. Alright? Now, the reason why Pisces is the last sign in terms of the 12th sign, basically, is because it represents the peak of this evolutionary experience that started in Aries. But that peak is not only just the end of a process, it is the potential beginning of another process. So that in that sense, the Aries to Piscean cycle really is not a circle, but a helix. Because from Pisces, you go back to the 0 degrees of Aries. And then the entire thing starts off again. It tells us of the continuity of life, the need for life to continue, the need for self-awareness to cycle. And it represents an important aspect of nature, an important behavior in nature. So in this, we see that the central problem with the Piscean archetype is having to deal with the separateness of reality, which is how society today is built. Society is built and organized based on boundary conditions. I mean, it's so intense, these boundary conditions, that we recognize things like boundaries between human beings. And we emphasize the boundary condition between internal reality and external reality. That boundary condition is the skin. It's why we focus, some human beings basically have invented what you call racism to emphasize the divisions that exist between people. Now, those divisions don't really exist. They are stories. They're narratives, okay, that emphasize these divisions. And it is upon these narratives that these divisions have been built. That's why you have countries. Countries are artificial constructs. They are boundaries. And these boundaries that don't exist as physical things, they're stories in your head. So they're stories that institutions or group of people come together to tell themselves in such a way that they become an institution, and they begin to divide people along artificial boundaries. That's the nature of the reality that we have been exposed to. The reality that seeks to differentiate and discriminate and separate. The Piscean does not understand what that is. And it is pretty interesting that these structures are the structures that, the architects of modern reality have come up with in an age of Pisces. Although Pisces is now gone because we are in Aquarius now. And that means that we're going to have to confront the nature of these artificial constructs because we cannot take them into Aquarius. Any attempt to do so, and it will lead to the dissolution of the entire structure because they are artificial in Pisces. Because the nature of Pisces is to resist these types of structures, these types of boundaries, these types of narratives. And that's the reason why when you go to a boundary condition or boundary area between two countries, you don't find anything there but structures that human beings have erected to try to emphasize these separations. The reason is because the separations don't exist. Pisces is the true nature of reality. But because humans don't know what it is, right? We don't know what it means or what it's supposed to mean. So we tell ourselves all sorts of stories. And the reason why we don't know what Pisces is because we don't know what we are. Human beings in the modern age have no idea what they are. And because of that, they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing here. They have no idea where they're supposed to be going. They have no idea what life is supposed to mean. Because the only way you can have an idea regarding these things is if you know who you are. And most importantly, they have no idea who God is supposed to be. And so in the absence of that, everyone tells themselves stories. They make up different gods, allocates properties and attributes to these gods, and they say these are our gods. And then it begins to matter whose God is the real God or whose God is the strongest. And they basically try to decipher what this answer is by warring against themselves. Now, these are extensions of the same type of stories that are crafted in racism, discrimination. These are all extensions of one thing. They are not many things. They are the result of not being able to understand what the Piscean archetype really is. The way personality archetypes work, the way these large signs behave is this. When you do not understand what an archetype is, and you try to, to model it through, it will drive you crazy. Because remember, the archetype does not exist anywhere but in your head. So that it is an aspect of your being. And when you do not understand an aspect of your being, that reality system that you are living is incomplete. It is unbalanced, and therefore it contains ignorance. Now, ignorance is an extremely volatile thing because it is a space where nothing exists. And your reality already has a place like that, which you constructed. That aspect of your reality that's supposed to behave that way is called Saturn, because it is denial. Alright? So it is an aspect of your reality that is already a heavy part for you because there's nothing there. Your job, your life job is to construct the bridge across this denial. Alright? So as to nullify the effects of that Saturn. But a denial also exists wherever you do not understand what the archetype is saying. And that's why I conduct natal chart synthesis. Natal chart synthesis is basically to show you and demonstrate to you how that archetype is supposed to work. All your archetypes, how they're supposed to work connected together. And in that way, we're able to resolve the singular narrative that is your life task, why you are here. But you cannot know why you are here if you don't know what you are. And that's why in my first class in astrology that I teach, my class on natal chart synthesis training, right? The first lecture is, why does astrology work? Because if you don't know why astrology works, then you are just believing in a religion. And astrology is not a religion. Astrology in its essence is Aquarian. Aquarius is intellectual power. How then can astrology be some type of religion that you take on faith? It cannot be. And that's because you do not have the resolution necessary to see what it really is, to see where it comes from, and how it becomes a description of reality. You should come join my classes if you want. And then you can see all of that. But when a psychological archetype exists in your mind and you do not understand it, then you create a response to it that is not fit for purpose. And that ultimately drives you insane. The insanity itself shows up in your life as a bundle of bad decisions. That's really what it is. An ongoing series of bad decisions. And your reality, just like your physical body, is always trying to bring you back along your track. Just like your body is always trying to keep you alive. And so there will be reactions. That's the nature of your being, because your self-awareness is not a singular thing. It's a spectrum, meaning it's a continuation. It's an infinite spectrum. So that what you are is a gradation in self-awareness. The peak of that gradation is your conscious mind, which you can focus at attention. But that grades away all the way, infinitely down, to the point where you are able to run your kidneys, your liver, your blood, and all of that. Yet you're not doing it consciously. But it's still you doing it. Alright? So that the self, what the self really is not a thing per se. It's a spectrum. Alright? Just like you have the rainbow containing colors. That's also a spectrum. I even have a podcast, a new podcast, but it's for members only. So if you want to listen to it, come join my YouTube channel, become a member, where I describe astrology from the basis of the physics of color. I describe behavior because everything is a response. Alright, color is a response because colors don't actually exist. They are psychological responses to wavelengths of light. That's really what it is. So from a physical point of view, you can describe the wavelength of a light. And then the human associates that with a color, which now forms part of your own subjective experience. What I'm trying to say is that the Piscean is all subjective. And in that subjective reality, there are no boundaries. You just have this infinite spectrum that just grades. There's no separation. So that the Piscean does not understand what it means to be separate from another human being. And when you have placements in Pisces, the sign itself tries to make that functional light, no matter what it is, behave in that way. So a functional light that is akin to having boundaries like Saturn begins to struggle in Pisces. Okay? Because then the only way to implement a boundary system in Pisces is to create disappearance in that sense. So people who have Neptune in Capricorn, they're evasive. That's one of the natures of interaction between Saturn and Neptune. Evasion. They just disappear for a while. And all Pisceans do this to a certain extent when the reality system that is essentially very Saturnian becomes too much for them to deal with. They need to disappear. They go to a place where they can disconnect from this harshness of reality so that they can recharge their batteries, because their reality system is largely driven by this imaginative narrative that they tell themselves deep within their consciousness that allows them to connect all aspects of reality into one. Now, the difficulty there is that this totality narrative is not something that they understand. How can they? Imagine telling a singular narrative that connects everything together. Most people just call it God because they have no way to really, be more precise about resolving its internal characteristics. But what it is, really, is the highest possible awareness. Because it means that from one end of the universe to another end of the universe, you can always tell what is happening. So it's the highest form of cognition. That's what Pisces is. And we've lived 2,000 years of the age of Pisces. And the best that humanity has come up with is what? Religion. Which is born from the need to separate things. That's why you have many religions. And what are they doing? They're killing themselves. They're killing themselves based on the reality of a very simple truth. The most simple and fundamental truth in human nature. Who is God? The evidence of the fact that humanity doesn't know the answer to this simple question is that they're killing themselves. They're warring with each other. Alright? Because here's the thing, right? 2 + 2 is 4. Ain't nobody fighting wars about that. Ain't no confusion about that either. And yet the most fundamental thing to a human being that has achieved the Piscean intellect, which is the highest level of cognition, which is the highest level of understanding possible, is to know who God is. Well, you want to know? God is you. And the way to understand that is that God is the God of nature. That's really what it is. God is the God of nature. Nature is the intelligence of the Creator. The Creator is the one that makes reality possible, right? Sets all the rules and the behaviors of everything. Yeah. So if you're describing a God that doesn't correspond to that nature, then you don't know what you're talking about. If the essence of your religion does not contain a description of how nature behaves and the intelligence that is within nature, the supreme intelligence that was used to create nature, then you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't matter how many times you kill yourselves. Now, in this part of the universe, right, all life is dependent on the sun. Now, the sun doesn't give you life. It's not the materials for life. The materials for life are engineered within a sun. And when that star, the sun, dies, it spills out all these materials, especially the material of carbon, water, and nitrogen and all these other elements. They're all produced within the interiors of stars. When the star dies, it brings out all these materials and makes it available. And the material is organized into some type of what you call a planet or whatever it is, right? But the planet is dead if there's no animator. The animator is a sun. That's what we call a sun. So the sun in the sky is the animator. And the way that it animates is that it issues instructions. The instructions that are encoded within its radiation and its light and its heat. Now, those instructions are non-negotiable. Meaning that if you understand the instructions and you can use them, you will evolve towards life. But if you do not understand it, then there is no evolution possible. Everything just remains static or frozen. Look at all the planets in the solar system. The only planet in the solar system where this understanding has found meaning is on Earth. Because all the elements are present, and the heat to drive the evolution itself is provided by the sun and its interaction with liquid water. That sun is the intelligence of nature. So that if your religion is really talking about something else, then your religion doesn't know what it's talking about. And that's the thing about Pisces. You see, Pisces is so super fine. It's so high that it is so easy to miss the mark. And that's why the symbolism for Pisces, the functional light that rules Pisces, is Neptune. You don't know what Neptune is? Neptune is a trident. And there's a reason for that. It is how one thing can become many things. And it is the nature of that in the mind that we call confusion. It can represent confusion. It can also represent the highest brilliance. That is why the most intelligent people believe that imagination is more important than knowledge. Because imagination is the ability to tell yourself these high stories. And the process of knowledge is now bringing it down gradually, where it can now find meaning and pattern in everyday reality. But that's not really what it is. Because that imagination, when you take it to its asymptotic limit, when you take it to the highest possible form that it can be, it overflows into compassion, empathy, and love. And it is within that you find the greatest intelligence. Because it's a coming together of everything in existence. That is why the highest possible form of self-awareness is love, compassion, and empathy. And it is in this reality that the Piscean lives. The difficulty all major Piscean placements have is how to translate that very high vision, that very high compassion or empathy into the everyday reality that we have around us, that is built from the structures of wickedness, of cruelty. They don't know what that means. Okay? So within them, they are forced to create a space within them that can accommodate this type of reality. But by doing so, they suffer. And it is in that sense that Piscean placements oftentimes result in loss. Because each loss represents a realization for them that they are living in a reality that is far degraded than what they have imagined. So that in some sense, they come across as not being very realistic in that sense. You say, what does that mean? It means learning to live in a degraded reality such as we have today. A reality where there's deception, lies, cruelty, and wickedness. The Piscean really doesn't understand what all of that is. They have to learn what it's like. It is because of this that it is very important for Pisceans to develop constructive outlets for their imaginative faculties. Because if they don't, then they will tend to try to extend it to this type of reality which we experience today. And this type of reality is not that. Even though this reality is meant to have come from the age of Pisces, right? It is paradoxical, because one very bad aspect of Pisces is that when it has been brutalized and exposed to horror over and over again, it begins to mimic that which brutalizes it. Because the Piscean really is a perfect mimic machine. They can mimic anything. They can become anyone and anything. Alright? It's part of that imaginative faculty. They can also mimic the brutality of the environment. And that's exactly what has happened here. The modern system of reality that we run today came from an interaction with brutality. The brutality itself came from nature, the way nature was perceived to behave. And so the reality system that we have today on Earth, all over the planet, that has been extended to all over the planet, comes from humankind's relationship with an extremely barren and frozen wasteland. A wasteland where there was nothing to eat, where nature would kill you just for existing. Alright? It was a nature that did not have the sun in it. And like I said, the sun is the animator of all life. It is the central energy source. It is what tells all life what to be and how to be. And what life has to do is to conform. If it cannot conform, it will kill it. Now, the reality system that we're experiencing on Earth came from the fact that the human was forced to survive in this environment without the sun. and it killed a lot. And so the Piscean began to adapt to this harsh environment, to the point where it now believes that it is that harsh environment itself. All right? That's the modern day reality all over the earth. And so the Pisces has very good sides. It can represent the loftiest aspirations of the human consciousness. It can also represent the worst: deception, cruelty, wickedness. Because what it is a mimic. So if it mimics its environment, the Piscean will mimic its environment. A Piscean that grows up in an environment that inculcates these high attributes or these lofty attributes, right, will mimic them. A Piscean that is taught to survive in a very degraded form of reality, where they have to become far lower than they're capable just to be able to survive, they will mimic that environment. And after a while, they might even forget that that's not all that they are. Okay? Now, when the moon finds itself in Pisces, we have to understand the nature of the moon first. Because what is the moon? The moon is symbolism of the sign of Cancer. It's symbolic of it. Meaning it carries the needs of the sign of Cancer. And what are those needs? Well, Cancer is an internal representation of reality. It represents the deepest part of the way that we represent reality. When reality is represented so deeply, we call that familiarity. And it is in that sense that the sign of Cancer rules our memories. Because where you have Cancer is where you are internalizing reality to the point where it means something. And it forms the first basis of intelligence. The first truly internal representation of intelligence. That's why the sign of Cancer comes after Gemini. Alright? But where Cancer sends the moon is where it goes to seek this emotional intelligence. And everywhere it sends the moon to, it is seeking something in response, and that is the nature of acceptance. Because the nature of emotional intelligence is to try to decipher where and how it should be accepted. And so where the moon finds itself in the sign of Pisces, it has gone into this dreamy world, this world of loftiness, right? It has gone there to seek acceptance. Now, remember what I said earlier. Pisces is the highest expression of consciousness. And at that high expression, what you find there is the greatest compassion and love. That is what the moon has gone to look for in the form of acceptance. So, the moon in Piscean is searching for this. Is searching for divine acceptance. And it depends on what the Piscean has realized as divinity. If they have realized it as God, then that's where they go. If they have realized it as a person, then that's where they go. If they have realized it as an environment, then that's what they're looking for. Because it is where they idealize an internal yearning. Now, in the early years of the moon in Piscean personality, they will not be able to articulate what this yearning is, but it will affect all their decisions. It will affect their ability to concentrate. It will affect their ability to imbibe the narratives of everyday reality that is really just a Saturnian reality. And so they may be accused of daydreaming. They may be accused of drifting aimlessly without purpose, unable to focus on anything, but that's not really what it is. You see, first and foremost, the Piscean needs to identify what they consider to be that Pisces. Now, whatever the Piscean identifies is what they now idealize in that way as a unity of all things. It is where they now bring their focus and search for the divine narrative, the one narrative that encapsulates everything. So it's a kind of idealism of some kind, but not the idealism represented in Aquarius. This is more like a spiritual longing, because the individual does not know how to connect cause to effect in Pisces. Everything seems hidden. Everything seems fuzzy. Everything seems like a mirage of some kind. And then they describe the experience as a type of spiritual experience, because the mind cannot go into details regarding all the nature of the dynamics. And that's where the moon goes to. And the moon wants to internalize this. Now, the downside of this is that they can feel as if they are walking in water. They are sinking. And they may feel that at different points of their reality or different areas of their reality where they can't seem to get a grip, because the reason why the moon goes to seek acceptance is because what it's really looking for is a foundation. It's the feeling of your feet being planted firmly on a stable and solid surface. And it's not that nothing changes. It is the predictable change of the moon. You know, the moon changes, but it's a predictable type of change, meaning that you can set your clock by it. And when things are predictable and changeable, then they're familiar. They have a rhythm to them. And you can use that rhythm, right, to navigate existence. And that's why you have lunar calendars. When the moon is in Pisces, it is searching for that rhythm. There is no rhythm in Pisces. Such things are not possible in Pisces. What you have in Pisces is like a void that extends forever, infinitely. Because what you're doing is you are privy to the entire spectrum of consciousness, the infinite spectrum of consciousness. And so the search process, because initially the moon in Pisces doesn't understand what this is, so they constantly search that void, that infinite vast space. They're searching for the rhythms, the patterns that help them to familiarize themselves in that space. They don't find them. And while they're doing this, they may come across to others as unable to deal with reality, daydreaming, lost in their thoughts, not able to focus and all that. But that's not what they're really doing. That's not what is going on there. Alright? They are trying to pattern that space. Now, at some point in time, they realize that this is impossible. Now, after the initial disempowerment that comes from such a realization, they now discover their superpower. You see, what they have is the ability to pattern in that space. It doesn't matter whether they can find rhythms or whatever. They can create their own rhythms, because now they have the ability to pattern whatever they want. It's like having a blank canvas. So go to town. They now understand that this is what makes them artistic. They can create whatever they want. They can imagine any type of reality, meaning that they can tell themselves whatever type of stories that they want. But the emphasis now focuses on stories that allow them to ground themselves. So what the moon in Pisces really is searching for in order to be able to function in the real world is that particular set of narratives that allow them to ground themselves in reality, whatever that reality is. But they must be able to feel connected to it in such ways that those realities become predictable and familiar. Doesn't matter what the stories are. They must just have these two qualities of predictability and stability. Now, by nature, these are imaginative in Pisces. Alright? So, the moon in Pisces personality, once they have come up with this narrative that meets these two criteria, then they're on their way, because that moon in Pisces is a superpower. Alright? It's what allows them to be infinitely creative, to be able to daydream, to be able to visit the world of Pisces and to bring down every type of knowledge. Because remember, Pisces contains every type of movement. It is infinitely complex. That's what makes it very difficult. Because our minds are not suited to grappling with infinite complexity. When such things occur, we just associate it to spirituality, and then we bring in the divine and we call it God, and that seems to be the end of the matter. But the reality of the matter is that the moon in Pisces is able to go into this infinite complexity and to search various aspects of it, but not in the way that Mercury in Pisces will connect to it. The moon in Pisces has the ability to merge with certain aspects of this infinite complexity. And if they're conscious enough to be able to bring that down, what they're able to bring down is a new type of understanding. So that you can now translate that infinite complexity. You can reduce it and represent it in a form that it becomes a new type of knowledge, a new type of awareness brought into self-consciousness. And if you work at this to be able to give it structure once you have brought it down, you can come up with a new theory of understanding. And so the moon in Pisces has the seeds for absolute brilliance and genius. That's really what it is. Not to talk of the fact that they have access to the most compassionate levels of consciousness possible, the greatest empathy that allows them to blend with masses of people, such that they're able to connect with the unconscious of people. You know, when a lot of people connect together like that, the whole world may be feeling one thing at some point in time. Those feelings emanate like waves on an ocean. That's really what it is. That's why in most of the religious narratives, the masses of people are called the many waters. Because they're moving in a sense. They're not moving independently or individually. They seem to be connecting on a very high level and moving in waves. Those waves tend to show up in trends and fads, fashion trends, TikTok trends, or whatever kind of trends. These are all Piscean and Neptunian. The moon in Pisces is able to tap into these waves and these narratives. Alright? Because they're extremely complex. I mean, people run entire marketing agencies just to be able to find out what the wave is doing or what it's going to do. And do you know how rewarding that can be? If you can tap into that wave, it means you can tell the trends that emerge and how they emerge from a very broad point of view. Okay? And if you can time the crests of these waves, you can ride them out. And so the moon in Pisces is a trend decipherer in that sense. Alright? It's one of their superpowers. That's why they need their solitude. Because they can connect with these waves and then drift within them. Okay? Now, the downside of all of this is that the moon in Pisces can appear lost. If they cannot find that narrative that allows them to find rhythm and stability, even in the void, right? Then they tend to become very lost. And that generates addictive behaviors because the mind cannot cope with such an absence. And so they look for artificial stimulants to kind of ground them. And the nature of these things is that once they connect with the plutonic themes within the natal chart, that is the basis for addiction. And it becomes very difficult to break if it becomes the essence of their rhythm and their pattern. Okay? That's really what it is. And so it is very important that the moon in Pisces be placed or locate themselves within an environment that they would like to mimic. Because whatever that environment is, that's what they're going to become.